Sinister stories.
It was bright sunny fall day, with the leaves falling to the ground. It was a little too chilly to play outside, so James took his daughter Lily to Adventure Playland for a fun day out. Lily was ecstatic, her eyes sparkling with excitement as she bounced around, eagerly exploring every corner of the massive indoor playground. As James watched Lily play, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and joy. She was his little princess, and he cherished every moment they spent together. Lily's favorite was the giant ball pit that spanned almost half of the facility. Lily would jump in and jump up to surprise her dad. They repeated this again and again, and James pretended to be surprised each time. This is beginning of a great memory of his daughter, he thought to himself. However, his happiness soon turned to panic when Lily did not come up from the giant ball pit after just jumping in. He waited and called out her name while he scanned around the area she had jumped. Frantically, James jumped in and began searching through the ball pit, calling out Lily's name with increasing desperation. His heart pounded in his chest as he imagined the worst scenarios. The other parents noticed James's distress and offered to help search for Lily. Together, they combed through every inch of Adventure Playland, but there was no sign of her. Time had passed, and James refused to give up hope. He couldn't bear the thought of losing his precious daughter. James rushed over to the ball pit and started digging through the colorful balls again. His heart raced as he prayed to find Lily safe and sound. James's heart sank as he realized that Lily was nowhere to be found, even after a thorough search of the entire ball pit. Despite the efforts of the other parents and the frantic digging through the sea of colorful balls, Emily remained elusive. Feeling a sense of helplessness and despair wash over him, James's mind raced with fear and uncertainty. How could his daughter simply disappear without a trace? Every worst-case scenario played out in his mind, each one more terrifying than the last. With trembling hands, James reached for his phone and dialed 911, his voice shaking as he recounted the events to the operator. Help was on the way, they assured him, but even as James hung up the phone, he couldn't shake the feeling of dread that consumed him. Minutes stretched into agonizing hours as James waited for the authorities to arrive. Despite the growing crowd of concerned parents and staff members, there was still no sign of Emily. The police searched Adventure Playland from top to bottom, but their efforts yielded no clues as to her whereabouts. As night fell and the search continued, James's thoughts turned to the possibility of foul play. Was someone in Adventure Playland responsible for Lily's disappearance? Or had she wandered off on her own, lost and alone in the vast expanse of the indoor playground? The hours stretched on, each passing moment filled with a sense of mounting despair. James refused to give up hope, clinging to the belief that his daughter would be found safe and sound. But as the night wore on, that hope began to fade, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. Finally, without success, the police called off the search. There was still no sign of Emily, and despite their best efforts, they were no closer to finding her than they had been hours before. His daughter was out there somewhere, alone and afraid, and he didn't know if he would ever see her again. Emily had vanished without a trace. From that moment on, his life became a blur of relentless searching, sleepless nights, and haunting memories. At first, James threw himself into the search with unwavering determination. He combed through every inch of Adventure Playland, plastered the area with missing posters, and enlisted the help of anyone who would listen. Each night, James lay awake in bed, tormented by visions of Lily's smiling face and echoing laughter. Her voice seemed to follow him everywhere, whispering to him in the darkness, a constant reminder of the daughter he had lost. But as the weeks stretched into months, Lily's voice began to change. It no longer sounded like her sweet, innocent laughter. Instead, it became twisted and distorted, filled with a sense of malice and despair. At first, James dismissed it as his mind playing tricks on him, a product of his grief-stricken imagination. But as the days went by, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He started seeing glimpses of Emily everywhere he went, in the faces of strangers on the street, in the shadows across the walls of his empty house. Her presence became a constant companion, a haunting reminder of the daughter he had lost. Desperate for answers, James, delved deeper into the mystery of Lily's disappearance. He retraced his steps, revisiting every moment leading up to that fateful day, searching for any clue that might lead him to her. But the more he searched, the more he began to lose touch with reality. His mind became consumed by paranoia and delusion, his thoughts plagued by visions of a dark and sinister force lurking just beyond the edge of his perception. He started hearing whispers in the darkness, voices that seemed to speak directly to his soul. They urged him to keep searching, to never give up hope, even as the world around him crumbled into chaos. As time continued, James's grip on reality grew ever more tenuous. He became convinced that Adventure Playland held the key to Lily's disappearance, that there was something lurking within its walls, waiting to be uncovered. Driven by an insatiable need for answers, James returned to Adventure Playland one night, scouring its empty halls in search of the truth. After hours of searching, he crumbled to the ground with hands covering his face. He then sat up only to be transported back to the day he lost her. He looked up, and there was Emily, smiling and laughing. As she was getting ready to jump into the ball pit, James tried to stop her, but he was too late. James then jumped into the ball pit and searched, but as he dug deeper, his frantic movements stirred up a cloud of dust and debris. Coughing and choking, James struggled to see through the haze, and then he saw her. Emily was standing in the center of the ball pit, her face obscured by shadows. She beckoned for James to come closer, her giggles echoing eerily in the empty playground. Relieved and overjoyed, James waded through the balls towards his daughter, but with each step, he felt a creeping sense of unease gnawing at his insides. Something was wrong. As James reached out to grab Lily's hand, he froze in horror. The figure standing before him was not his daughter. Its eyes were empty voids, its skin a sickly shade of gray, and when it spoke, its voice sent shivers down James's spine.
"Join us, Daddy,"
it whispered, its voice a haunting echo of Lily's laughter. James stumbled backward, his mind reeling with fear and confusion. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew he had to get out of there. Grabbing handfuls of balls, he pushed his way through the pit, ignoring the whispers that seemed to follow him. Finally, James burst out of the ball pit and into the open space of Adventure Playland. He collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath, his heart pounding in his chest. But as he looked around, he realized something was terribly wrong. The once lively playground was now silent and still, the colorful walls and slides now faded and decrepit. And then he heard it. The faint sound of laughter echoing through the empty halls, a chilling reminder of what lurked within. James knew he had to leave, to escape this nightmare and find help. Then, just like that, he woke up, laying in his empty bed, overcome by sadness and feeling truly alone. As James's search for his daughter Emily continued, another parent's nightmare was just beginning. Rose, a young mom, so full of life and excitement. Rose stood at the edge of the ball pit, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched her son, Oscar, disappear into the colorful sea of balls. But as she waited for him to resurface, dread crept into Rose's heart. Seconds turned into minutes, and still there was no sign of Oscar. Panic seized her as she frantically scanned the surface of the ball pit, calling out his name in a trembling voice. Other parents rushed to Rose's side, offering to help search for Oscar. Together, they combed through the ball pit, their hands digging through the balls in a desperate attempt to find him. But despite their efforts, Oscar remained elusive, lost in the labyrinthine depths of Adventure Playland. As Rose's cries grew more frantic, James's heart went out to her. He knew all too well the agony of losing a child, and he vowed to do everything in his power to help find Oscar. He enlisted the help of the other parents, and coordinated with the authorities to comb through every inch of Adventure Playland with a fine-toothed comb. Together, they scoured every corner of the indoor playground, leaving no stone unturned in their quest to find Oscar. But as the hours stretched on and the sun began to set, hope began to fade. It was déjà vu for James. Police came and searched everywhere with no avail. James could see the horror in Rose's face, and all too familiar feeling. Yet James refused to give up. With each passing day, he pushed himself harder, driven by a relentless determination to bring Emily and Oscar home safely. But as the days turned into weeks and then months, the search yielded no results. Adventure Playland remained a silent monument to the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls, its once vibrant atmosphere now suffused with an eerie sense of emptiness. Despite their best efforts, James and Rose were unable to unravel the mystery of the disappearing children. The fate of Emily and Oscar remained a haunting enigma, their whereabouts unknown, their stories destined to remain forever unresolved. As time passed, Adventure Playland faded into obscurity, its halls abandoned and forgotten, a solemn reminder of the darkness that lurked within its depths. And as James stood amidst the wreckage of the once bustling indoor playground, he couldn't help but wonder if he would ever find closure for the loss of his daughter, or if Adventure Playland would forever remain a place of unsolved mysteries and shattered dreams. 15 years had passed since Emily vanished into the depths of Adventure Playland, leaving James trapped in a nightmare from which he could never fully awaken. In those years, he had become a shell of his former self, haunted by the memory of his lost daughter and driven to the brink of madness by his relentless search for answers. But one day, as James sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, the phone rang, shattering the silence that had enveloped him for so long. With trembling hands, he picked up the receiver, his heart pounding in his chest as he heard the voice on the other end of the line. It was Rose, the mother of Oscar. They hadn't spoken in years. Their grief drove them apart as they struggled to come to terms with the loss of their children. But now, Rose's voice was filled with urgency and desperation, her words tumbling out in a rush as she spoke of a phone call she had received, a phone call from Emily. According to Rose, Emily had reached out to her out of the blue, claiming that she and Oscar were okay, that they were together and safe, and they wanted Rose and James to come to them, to finally be reunited after all these years. At first, James couldn't believe what he was hearing. It seemed impossible, a cruel trick of fate designed to torment him further, but as Rose spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something different about her voice, something that rang true. With a sense of both hope and trepidation, James agreed to meet Rose, his mind racing with questions and doubts. Could it be possible that Emily was still alive after all these years? And if so, what had happened to her and Oscar during their time apart? As he made his way to the meeting spot, James's heart pounded with anticipation, his mind filled with visions of Lily's smiling face and the possibility of finally being reunited with his daughter. But beneath the surface, a nagging sense of doubt lingered, a fear that this reunion might be nothing more than a cruel illusion. When James arrived, Rose was waiting for him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Without a word, she handed him a piece of paper, an address written with Lily's directions. With a sense of both excitement and trepidation, James and Rose set off towards the address, their hearts pounding with anticipation as they ventured into the unknown. Was this the moment he had been waiting for, the moment when he would finally be reunited with his daughter after all these years? But as they reached the address, their hopes were dashed. The building before them was old and dilapidated, its windows boarded up and its doors hanging off their hinges. It seemed abandoned, a forgotten relic of a bygone era. With a sinking feeling in his gut, James realized that there was no reunion waiting for him here. No happy ending to the story that had consumed his life for the past 15 years. As he stood in front of the derelict building, a sense of profound sadness washed over him. He had spent so long chasing after ghosts, so long clinging to the hope that Emily was still alive, that he had lost sight of the world around him. But as his head dropped down in sadness and turned to leave, a voice echoed in his mind, a voice that sounded strangely familiar, yet infinitely distant. It was Lily's voice, whispering to him from the depths of his memories, urging him to let go and move on. With a heavy heart, James realized that it was time to finally let go of the past, to release himself from the grip of grief and embrace the uncertainty of the future. And as he walked away from the abandoned building, he knew that he would carry Lily's memory with him always, a beacon of light in the darkness that had consumed his life for so long. As they turned around and started to head towards the street, there were two shadowy figures suddenly in front of them. James and Rose stood in disbelief as they came face to face with two strangers who claimed to be their long-lost children, Emily and Oscar. The resemblance was uncanny. The same eyes, the same smile. but it seemed impossible that these adults standing before them could be the same children who had vanished all those years ago. Tears welled up in James's eyes as he reached out to touch Lily's face, searching for any sign of the little girl he had lost. But as his fingers brushed against Lily's cheek, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that this reunion was too good to be true. Rose's heart pounded in her chest as she studied Oscar's face, searching for any trace of the young boy she had once known. But as she looked into Oscar's eyes, she couldn't shake the feeling of doubt that gnawed at her, whispering of the impossibility of this moment. "Where have you been all this time?" James asked, his voice trembling with emotion. Emily and Oscar exchanged a glance, their faces clouded with uncertainty. For a moment, they seemed hesitant to speak, as if unsure of how to answer the question that had haunted their parents for so many years. But then, with a sense of determination, Emily spoke. "We've been somewhere else," she said cryptically, her voice tinged with sadness. Oscar nodded in agreement, his expression troubled. "It's hard to explain," he added, his voice barely above a whisper. James and Rose exchanged a glance, their hearts heavy with a mixture of hope and doubt. Could it be possible that their children had truly returned to them after all these years? Or was this some cruel trick of fate, a mirage born from the depths of their grief-stricken minds? But as they looked into the eyes of Emily and Oscar, they couldn't deny the overwhelming sense of familiarity that washed over them, the feeling that these two strangers standing before them were somehow their children, no matter how impossible it seemed. With a sense of trepidation, James and Rose embraced Emily and Oscar, holding them close as tears of joy streamed down their faces. It didn't matter where they had been or what they had been through. All that mattered was that they were finally home. And as they walked away from the abandoned building, hand in hand with their children, James and Rose knew that their journey was far from over. There were still unanswered questions, still mysteries waiting to be unraveled. But for now, in this moment of reunion and reconciliation, they allowed themselves to bask in the warmth of their family's embrace, knowing that no matter what the future held, they would face it together as a family reunited at last.